Welcome to Short Movie Channel. Our film today begins on a stormy night in the U.S. state of New Jersey. We see police forces and patrols spread out as usual on the roads, and we learn they are searching for a very dangerous criminal. Later, we see a police patrol stop a truck on the road. One of the officers approaches the driver to check his license and ID. However, the driver doesn't have any papers at all. The other officers head over to inspect the truck, opening the rear compartment. When they look inside, they are shocked to find a large number of dogs crammed into the truck's container. A little while later, psychologist Evelyn arrives at the police station to file her report on the truck driver, who had been arrested and detained. When Evelyn enters the holding area, she notices the driver has a fresh wound on his back. He's also sitting in a wheelchair, wearing women's clothing and a wig. The driver starts talking to Evelyn, introducing himself as Douglas. He tells her that those dogs are his children, his family, and everything he has in this world. Evelyn keeps talking to him, studying his case. Eventually, Douglas decides to share his story with her from the very beginning. The film flashes back to the past, where we learn about Douglas's life. Douglas grew up in a strange family with even stranger behavior. His father, Mike, was a reckless, aggressive man who participated in dogfight betting and matches. Mike raised a large number of dogs and often starved them for days before fights to make them more aggressive and vicious. Mike was always angry, treating his wife and son Douglas with violence over the smallest issues, especially if anyone tried to feed the dogs behind his back. However, Mike deeply loved his older son, Rich, because Rich was just like him. He treated the dogs with the same brutality. On the other hand, the dogs adored Douglas because he was always kind and gentle with them. He spent most of his time near the dog cages, talking to them and taking care of them. Douglas would also secretly feed the dogs behind his father Mike's and brother Rich's backs. Unfortunately for Douglas, one day, Rich caught him sneaking food to the dogs. Rich reported him to their father. When Mike confronted Douglas, he admitted that he loved the dogs more than his own family, and considered them his real family. Mike became furious at his son's confession. He dragged Douglas violently out of the house, opened the dog cage, and threw him inside. Immediately, the dogs approached Douglas, surrounding him with care and affection, as if trying to comfort him for what he was going through. From that day on, Douglas remained locked up in the dog cage, living, eating, and drinking alongside them. Even during the freezing cold of winter, he stayed confined with the dogs. His father would occasionally throw him scraps of food to keep him alive. After a long period of being trapped in the cage, his mother secretly brought him some canned food without his father or brother noticing. She asked him to bury it and hide it well so no one would find it. She also told him that she was planning to escape because she was pregnant and wanted her upcoming child to have a better life far away from the hell they were living in. Douglas continues his story and tells Dr. Evelyn that he didn't blame his mother for what she did. On the contrary, he believed she was right to escape that miserable life. The film then takes us back to show Dr. Evelyn leaving the police station, revealing events that took place before the police arrested Douglas. A young man named Juan is shown entering an abandoned college building. Inside, he encounters a Doberman standing guard at a hallway. Juan sets that hallway on fire and asks the dog about Douglas. The dog allows him to pass, and Juan enters deeper into the building, opening a secret door that leads to where Douglas is hiding. The film reveals that Juan had installed surveillance cameras in that place a few months earlier. Juan meets Douglas and gives him a puppy that an elderly woman named Marta had found. Marta, who owns a local laundromat, is where Douglas usually washes his clothes. Juan tells Douglas about a criminal and gang leader known as the Executioner. The Executioner extorts local shop and business owners, demanding weekly payments. Juan explains that Marta doesn't have the money to pay him, so she decided to sell some of her most treasured possessions to gather the money. Douglas replies confidently, "Don't worry, I'll take care of the Executioner." He then completely changes his appearance, dressing in black women's clothing, and waits on the street near the casino frequented by the gang members. Douglas sends a small dog into the casino with a phone in its mouth. The dog approaches the Executioner, the gang leader, and gives him the phone. Douglas calls the phone, and as the executioner answers, a larger dog suddenly storms in and attacks the place, biting the executioner in a sensitive area. Douglas warns the executioner not to move, or the dog will know exactly what to do. He then tells him, "I don't want you or your gang bothering the elderly woman Marta, the laundromat owner, ever again." Terrified, the executioner agrees immediately. However, as soon as the dogs leave the casino, he orders his men to follow them to find out who has the ability to train and control the dogs in such a professional manner. The film then takes us back to the present. The next day, Dr. Evelyn goes with the police and investigators to Douglas's house. They are horrified by what they find. The place is filled with corpses and blood splattered in every corner. Bullet holes cover the walls, as if a massive massacre had taken place there. Dr. Evelyn returns to Douglas once again and meets him, finding that he has cleaned up and changed his clothes. He thanks her for bringing his personal belongings from home, then continues telling her his story. "I had to live in the cage with the dogs for a few more months. I spent my time reading magazines that I accidentally found behind a wooden panel near the dog cage. One day, one of the dogs in the cage gave birth. I wanted to hide the puppies away from my father, Mike, and my brother, Richie. But Richie saw me trying to hide them and quickly ran to tell my father everything. Mike arrived with his rifle, intending to take the puppies. I pushed the cage door, trying to stop him, and screamed at him while the dogs barked loudly at Mike and Richie. My father became enraged and shot me, and the bullet struck my back with such force that it left a deep wound and severed one of my fingers. Richie, scared that my father might continue shooting and kill me, took him back inside the house and threw me a handkerchief into the cage. I couldn't move, but the dogs helped me by wrapping the handkerchief around my injured hand. I put my severed finger in a small bag I found there, then struggled to reach one of the magazines. I pointed to a picture of a police car in the magazine, signaling to the dog. The dog understood and escaped through the hole created by the bullet in the cage. It roamed the city with the bag in its mouth until it saw a police car. It jumped onto the car and placed the bag on top. One of the officers noticed the dog and the bag, and thanks to the dog, the police were led to the house where they found me injured in the cage. The officers were shocked by the tragic condition I was in. They arrested Mike and Richie, and an ambulance quickly took me to the hospital. We return to the present, where Douglas is speaking with Dr. Evelyn, saying, "With crutches, I can barely walk, and I can't stand for more than a minute or two. The doctors refuse to remove the bullet from my back because it's in a dangerous area that could cause partial or total paralysis." He added, "My father, Mike, was sentenced to 20 years in prison, but he committed suicide 2 weeks after being incarcerated. My brother, Richie, was sentenced to 12 years but was released after 8 years for good behavior. However, when Richie got out of prison, a group of my dogs was waiting for him outside. They began following and monitoring him like a shadow. More dogs joined the group, and Richie noticed this. He quickly tried to run and escape into side streets, but the dogs surrounded him and attacked him, tearing him apart completely and ending his life instantly. After that, Douglas left the hospital and was sent to an orphanage, but he didn't feel comfortable there. He couldn't adapt to the place or make friends because of his isolation and dependence on a wheelchair. He spent most of his time in the library, reading books. When he reached university age, he enrolled through online training programs and excelled, earning a bachelor's degree in biological sciences. Later, he got a job at a dog shelter. However, after some time, 2 government employees arrived and informed him of a mandatory decision to close the shelter, citing budget cuts. Douglas responded, "What budget cuts are you talking about? I didn't receive anything from the government except the building itself. All the expenses for the dogs come from donations." One of the employees then told him the truth. "The building was sold to an investor, and you have until next Monday to vacate the premises. The dogs will be sent to other shelters." By Monday, Douglas was no longer there. He had taken all the dogs with him, leaving not a single one in the shelter. The movie reveals that Douglas took the dogs and moved with them to the abandoned college building where he currently lives. After that, Douglas started looking for work everywhere, but he kept getting rejected because of his disability, as he is always confined to a wheelchair. One day, Douglas went to a casino that was hiring employees. When he arrived, he saw rehearsals and performances by a group of drag queens. Instantly, he fell in love with their art, costumes, and style. Douglas got out of his wheelchair and even asked to perform with them. The performers were impressed by his determination and convinced the club owner to let him join. A few days later, Douglas participated in his first show, where they helped him get to the stage and stand on it. His outstanding performance and incredible voice deeply impressed the audience, and he continued working with them. However, he soon realized that the money he was earning from acting wasn't enough to cover the expenses of taking care of his dogs. That's when he came up with the idea of training the dogs to steal from the homes of wealthy people. He called it Redistributing Wealth. Things were going smoothly until a wealthy woman reported her stolen jewelry to an insurance investigator named Orman. When Orman reviewed the surveillance footage, he noticed a dog stealing the jewelry. Remembering the series of strange thefts happening in the city recently without any suspects, he decided to review more footage. He found that the same dogs appeared in every incident. In one of the recordings, Orman and his team saw a man waiting for the dogs with a large truck. Using the truck's license plate, they discovered it was registered under Douglas's name. Further investigations revealed that Douglas was working with the drag queen group. Orman later met Douglas, presenting him with a bouquet of flowers, pretending to be an admirer of his voice and unique performance. Afterward, Orman followed Douglas with his car, tracking him to the abandoned college building. There, Orman encountered a Doberman guarding the entrance. When Orman was about to shoot the dog, Douglas suddenly appeared and assured him that the stolen jewelry was safe. Orman believed Douglas and entered the building to retrieve the stolen jewelry. However, Douglas ordered his dogs to attack Orman. The dogs pounced on him, killing him instantly. Douglas continued telling his story to Dr. Evelyn, explaining how the executioner and his men found his location after torturing one of his friends for information. They stormed the building, initiating a fierce battle. The dogs were ready for the fight, and Douglas armed himself to confront the executioner and his gang. The gang members spread out through the building, but the dogs and traps set by Douglas took them down one by one. When the executioner realized his men were being killed one after another, he became frightened and confused. Douglas appeared and started shooting at the gang members, though he was hit by a bullet in the back. Despite his injury, Douglas kept fighting alongside his dogs, eventually defeating the executioner. After the battle ended, Douglas fled the building with his dogs in his large truck. The movie then takes us back to the beginning when the police stopped Douglas and arrested him. While in the police car talking to the officer, he signals his dogs to escape from the truck. Later, we see the doctor saying her goodbyes, and then we see him sitting in his chair, smiling as he hears the sounds of the dogs surrounding the prison. The dogs launch an attack, manage to grab the cell keys, and free their friend. After escaping from prison, he is gravely ill and collapses in the middle of the street, passing away. The dogs gather around him in a scene that highlights the loyalty and incredible bond of dogs. As for the black dog, it goes to guard the doctor, as Nicholas had instructed it. And with that, today's story comes to an end. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. See you next time with another summary.